On a sultry afternoon in July 2023, the peaceful suburban life in the quaint neighborhood of Maplewood was shattered in a way no one could have foreseen. At the heart of this tragedy were the Thompsons. James, a 50-year-old piano teacher, known for his passion for music and his dedication to his students, and his wife, Linda, a 48-year-old school librarian with a warm smile and a love for literature. They had been pillars of the community for over a decade, their seemingly perfect marriage, the envy of many. Next door lived the Millers, Rebecca, a recent divorcee, and her 21-year-old son, Nathan, a college student home for the summer. The Millers had moved in 3 years ago, and while they were not overly social, they were generally well-liked by their neighbors. No one could have predicted how these ordinary lives would intertwine, leading to a catastrophic outcome. James Thompson was a man driven by his passion for music. Born into a family of musicians, he had been playing the piano since he was 5. His talent and dedication had earned him a reputation as a skilled teacher, with students who adored him and parents who trusted him. Linda, on the other hand, had a quieter passion. Growing up in a family of educators, she had always been surrounded by books. She became a librarian to share her love for reading with others, especially children. Their paths crossed at a music and literature festival in 1995. James, captivated by Linda's knowledge and gentle demeanor, was instantly smitten. Linda found James's dedication to his craft inspiring. They married a year later, their wedding a charming affair that reflected their shared love for art and culture. The early years of their marriage were filled with joy. James's music career flourished, and Linda found fulfillment in her work. But as time went on, cracks began to appear. James became more engrossed in his teaching, often working late into the evening. Linda, feeling increasingly lonely, immersed herself in her books. Their conversations grew sparse and superficial, revolving around daily routines and their grown children's lives. Physical intimacy had become a rare occurrence, laden with unspoken disappointments and unmet expectations. The Millers moved into the house next door in 2020, shortly after Rebecca's divorce. Rebecca, a reserved woman, found solace in gardening and painting. Nathan, an introverted computer science major, had a difficult time adjusting to the new environment. His shy nature made it hard for him to make friends, and he often found himself at home helping his mother with household chores. James took notice of Nathan's quiet demeanor and offered him a part-time job assisting with piano lessons and maintaining the garden. Over the years, Nathan blossomed under James's mentorship, growing more confident and finding a passion for music. He admired James and saw him as a father figure, especially since his own father had left a void in his life. The spark that ignited the affair between James and Rebecca was as unexpected as it was intense. It happened on a warm evening in early June during one of the Thompsons' annual summer barbecues. Linda was engrossed in a conversation with a friend, and James, feeling isolated, retreated to the quiet of his music room to fetch more drinks. Rebecca, seeking refuge from the crowd, found herself in the same room. Their eyes met, and something shifted. James moved to help Rebecca with a heavy tray, their hands brushing. They stood there momentarily, the touch sending a jolt through them both. It was Rebecca who broke the silence, her voice trembling as she thanked him. James, usually so composed, found himself stammering in response. That brief encounter set the stage for what was to come. Over the next few weeks, James and Rebecca found reasons to spend time together. It started innocently enough, Rebecca asking for gardening tips, James offering to help with a painting project. Each interaction was charged with an undercurrent of attraction that they both tried to ignore. Their first kiss happened almost a month after the barbecue. They had been working in the garden when a sudden summer storm broke out. Running for shelter under the gazebo, they were laughing and breathless when James looked at Rebecca and felt a surge of desire he hadn't experienced in years. Without thinking, he leaned in and kissed her. The first kiss between James and Rebecca marked the beginning of an affair that quickly escalated. James, who had always been methodical and reserved, found himself thinking about Rebecca constantly. He began to manufacture reasons to see her, whether it was dropping by with a book Linda had recommended or offering to fix a leaky faucet. One particularly memorable afternoon, Rebecca was struggling with a broken garden hose. Frustrated and flustered, she was on the verge of tears when James appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. He calmly took over, fixing the hose with ease. As the water began to flow smoothly, Rebecca looked at James with a mix of gratitude and something deeper. Without thinking, she leaned in and kissed him. A spontaneous act that left them both breathless and yearning for more. Their meetings became more clandestine and thrilling. They met in secluded spots around town, the back of the local library, hidden corners of the park, and, most dangerously, in the Thompsons' home when Linda was at work. Each encounter left them craving more, the age gap forgotten in the heat of their stolen moments. Rebecca felt rejuvenated, rediscovering parts of herself she thought were long lost. James was intoxicated by Rebecca's attention and the forbidden nature of their relationship. Their first night together was a blend of fear and exhilaration. It was a rainy evening, and James had invited Rebecca over under the pretext of discussing a community project. As the rain poured down outside, they sat close together on the couch, the tension between them palpable. James played a soft, melancholic tune on the piano, his eyes meeting Rebecca's over the keys. The music seemed to speak the words they couldn't say. As the last notes faded, James reached for Rebecca, pulling her into a passionate kiss. They spent the night exploring each other, the storm outside mirroring the tempest of emotions within. Despite the intense passion, both were acutely aware of the risks. Close calls became more frequent, a neighbor almost catching them in an embrace, a suspicious glance from Linda when Rebecca's name came up too often in conversation. One afternoon, they had a particularly close call. James had invited Rebecca over for lunch while Linda was at work. They were in the midst of a heated moment when the sound of Linda's car pulling into the driveway startled them. In a panic, Rebecca grabbed her clothes and fled through the back door, barely managing to escape without being seen. They laughed nervously afterwards, but the incident left them both shaken. The guilt, too, started to weigh on them both. Nathan, unaware of the affair, sensed something was off, but couldn't pinpoint what it was. He noticed his mother's frequent absences and the furtive glances she exchanged with James. Rebecca, struggling with her feelings of betrayal towards Nathan, often lay awake at night, torn between her longing for James and the crushing weight of guilt. James found himself lying more and more to Linda, each deception another crack in the foundation of their marriage. He would return home late, fabricating stories about extra piano lessons or community meetings. Linda, noticing his increasing absences and the coldness in their interactions, grew more concerned but remained silent, afraid to confront the possible truth. She immersed herself in her work, her passion for books becoming a refuge from the growing void in her marriage. Despite the risks and the guilt, neither James nor Rebecca seemed able to end the affair. They were caught in a whirlwind of passion and need, blind to the devastating consequences that loomed on the horizon. Rebecca, in particular, found herself more and more emotionally attached to James, fantasizing about a future together even as she knew it was impossible. James, for his part, was addicted to the excitement and the escape from his mundane, strained life. One particularly poignant evening, they met in the town's old cinema, a place that held memories of James's childhood. They sat in the back row, the flickering light of the screen casting shadows on their faces. As the movie played, James held Rebecca's hand, feeling a connection he hadn't felt in years. They whispered to each other, sharing dreams and fears, the outside world forgotten. In those moments, they felt like they were the only two people in the world. As the summer wore on, the strain of maintaining their secret began to show. The guilt and the fear of being discovered gnawed at them both, but the pull of their illicit relationship was too strong. They were living on borrowed time, each stolen moment bringing them closer to the inevitable reckoning. At 3:45 p.m., Linda's car pulled into the driveway, her mind racing with thoughts of the concerned neighbor's message. She noticed Rebecca's car parked a little down the street, a detail that only heightened her growing suspicion. As she unlocked the front door, an eerie quiet enveloped the house. Linda called out for James but received no response. Her pulse quickened as she walked through the hallway, noting the half-empty glass of wine on the coffee table, a sight unusual for this time of day. Then she heard it, a muffled noise coming from upstairs. Her heart pounded louder with each step as she climbed the stairs, the sound growing clearer and more distressing. Linda approached the master bedroom with a mixture of fear and resolve, her hands trembling as she reached for the doorknob. What Linda saw when she opened the door would be forever seared into her memory. There, in the bed they had shared for years, was her husband, James, entangled with Rebecca Miller. The scene hit her like a physical blow, the betrayal cutting deep into her soul. Shock quickly turned to a cold, seething rage. Her face flushed, and her vision narrowed as a red haze of anger clouded her thoughts. Without a word, Linda lunged forward, her hands grabbing at James, yanking him away from Rebecca with a strength born of pure fury. Rebecca screamed, scrambling to cover herself, but Linda's focus was solely on James. Her voice, usually so calm and composed, erupted in a torrent of accusations and insults, each word dripping with the pain of betrayal. "How could you do this to me? To us?" she shouted, her voice cracking. "After everything we've been through, everything I've sacrificed for you?" James, caught off guard and still reeling from the sudden confrontation, tried to calm her down. "Linda, please, let me explain," he stammered, his hands held up defensively. But Linda was beyond reason. Her fury was a living thing, consuming her entirely. She spotted a heavy brass candlestick on the nightstand, its polished surface gleaming ominously. Without thinking, she grabbed it, the weight of it comforting in her hand. "You don't get to explain," she screamed, swinging the candlestick with all her might. The first blow caught James on the side of the head, sending him staggering back, blood spurting from a gash above his ear. He cried out in pain, his hands instinctively reaching for the wound. But Linda was relentless. Years of suppressed resentment and heartbreak fueled her rage as she swung again, the candlestick connecting with James's shoulder, then his back. Each strike punctuated by a scream of anguish. "You lied to me! You betrayed me!" Rebecca, horrified, tried to intervene, but Linda's fury was unstoppable. "Get out!" Linda roared at her, the candlestick swinging dangerously close. Rebecca stumbled back, grabbing her clothes and fleeing the room in terror. James, now on his knees, his hands raised in a futile attempt to shield himself, looked up at Linda with a mix of fear and sorrow. "Linda, stop! Please!" he begged, his voice weak and desperate. But Linda couldn't stop. She had spent too long being the supportive wife, the understanding partner. In this moment, All the hurt and anger she had buried deep inside came pouring out. She brought the candlestick down one final time, the impact resonating through her arm as it struck James on the head with a sickening thud. James crumpled to the floor, blood pooling rapidly around his motionless form. Linda stood over him, panting heavily, the candlestick slipping from her grasp and clattering to the floor. The red haze of anger began to lift, replaced by a cold, numbing horror at what she had done. The room fell into a deafening silence, broken only by Linda's ragged breaths and the distant wail of approaching sirens. She sank to her knees beside James, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch his blood-streaked face. "Oh my God, what have I done?" she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. As the sirens grew louder, Linda remained by James's side, her mind a tumult of guilt and disbelief. She had lost control in a moment of blind rage, and now everything she had known was shattered beyond repair. The piercing wail of police sirens shattered the usual tranquility of Maplewood. Neighbors peered out from behind curtains, curiosity mingling with apprehension as squad cars and an ambulance screeched to a halt in front of the Thompson residence. The first officers on the scene were met with a tableau of horror that would haunt them for years to come. Inside, they found Linda, her hands covered in blood, sitting on the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Rebecca, barely clothed and in shock, sat on the edge of the bed, her face pale. James, lying on the floor, was barely conscious. Paramedics worked feverishly to stabilize him before rushing him to the hospital. Detective Sarah Collins, a veteran of the police department's homicide unit, took charge of the scene. Her first priority was securing medical attention for James. As paramedics worked, Collins began piecing together the events that had led to this tragedy. Linda was taken into custody without resistance. Rebecca, in a state of shock, was questioned separately. Their fragmented and emotional stories painted a picture of a long-simmering marital discord that had exploded into violence. The trial began on a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after the events that had rocked Maplewood to its core. The county courthouse, a stately building of red brick and white columns, was surrounded by reporters and curious onlookers. Inside, the tension was palpable as the judge called the court to order. Prosecuting attorney Veronica Talbot, known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue, laid out the state's case in her opening statement. She painted a vivid picture of Linda Thompson as a woman consumed by rage and jealousy, who had brutally attacked her husband and his lover. Talbot's words were measured but impactful, her gaze sweeping across the jury as she promised to prove Linda's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Defense attorney Michael Sterling countered with a narrative of his own. He portrayed Linda as a devoted wife and mother, driven to a moment of temporary insanity by the betrayal of her husband. Sterling suggested that the attack was a tragic accident, the result of a confrontation that had spiraled out of control. As the trial progressed, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Forensic experts testified about blood spatter patterns and the force required to cause James's injury. Neighbors recounted the events of that day, and character witnesses spoke to the personalities and reputations of James and Linda. But it was Rebecca Miller's testimony that captivated the courtroom. Over 2 grueling days, she described the affair and the moment Linda walked in on them, her voice trembling as she recounted the horror of the attack. After 7 weeks of testimony, evidence presentation, and legal arguments, the fate of Linda Thompson rested in the hands of the jury. As Judge Blackwell sent the 12 men and women to deliberate, a tense silence fell over the courtroom. The jury returned with their verdict after 2 days of deliberation. Linda Thompson was found guilty of aggravated assault. Judge Blackwell sentenced her to 10 years in state prison. with the possibility of parole after 7 years, citing the violent nature of the crime, but also considering her lack of prior criminal history and the extraordinary circumstances of the case. As Linda was led away in handcuffs, the full weight of the tragedy seemed to descend upon the courtroom. There were no victors here, only lives irrevocably altered by a moment of passion and a split second of violence. Outside, as news of the verdict spread, the community of Maplewood was left to grapple with the aftermath. The events that had unfolded would leave an indelible mark on the neighborhood for years to come, a stark reminder of how fragile the facade of suburban bliss can be.